guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 8 of our ukulele build. Well, when we left last week's show, of course we had just put all of the binding around the front soundboard of the ukulele, and that's where we're going to start today by untaping all of that and seeing what our results are from that particular glue up. Well, to be completely honest, I have no idea what to expect here. This whole build for me has been an experiment since day one, but we're going to go ahead and take all of this tape off, and what we're really looking for is to make sure that we have a good seal around the outside edge of the instrument, but as well a good seal here at the rabbet, the base of the rabbet, to make sure the binding is tightly into that particular recess. And so I'm going to remove all of this tape. I'm sure as heck not going to record removing it all. And when I get it all removed, I'll show you what we ended up with as the results for this. Well, I have to say I'm quite pleased with the results. We have a really tight joint. Let me see if I can show you that here. We have a really tight seal all the way around the ukulele, and it really looks good all the way around. What we're going to have to do now, and there really is no shortcut to do it, and that is to sand this flush with a piece of sandpaper mounted to a flat board. Once we get that sanded flush, we're going to have to sand all the way around the perimeter and get the maple flush with the mahogany. So I don't know what else to say other than let's get sanding. And with that, we've got the binding in place. I'm quite pleased with the results. Let me just show it to you here. I ended up using a combination of sandpaper and fine cabinet scraper, and that fine cabinet scraper really took it down nicely, as well as took care of any squeeze out that was there at all. So now, I guess for now we're going to leave the body, and we're going to go over to the blank that we glued up for the neck. Well, we've got our blank for the neck, and the first thing that I really want to do with this is square it all up. So first things first, I'm going to head over to the jointer. I'm going to make one flat side, then one perpendicular side, and then I'm going to take it over to the table saw, and we're going to make those two sides parallel and basically square up the entire blank. Well, here we have our maple blank, and I have squared this thing off 10 ways to Sunday. It is square on every corner, every side, as well as I've squared off the ends, and I've checked, double checked. I can't check it anymore. So at this point, I want to end up putting a center line now onto this particular blank. So I'll add a center line here for us to reference. Now, let's see here, this would be the center line right here. And now this here will be the line that all other markings now will be registered from. So this particular blank is just over 3 inches by 3 inches. It is overkill for this project, but I did want a little bit of extra to work with. I'd like to give myself a little bit of room, or wiggle room, as you've probably heard me call it. So I'm going to start all my measurements from 1/2 inch to one end. And I haven't quite decided yet what the joint will be from the neck of the instrument to the body. So I haven't decided if it's going to be mortise and tenon or a butt joint. So at this point in time, I'm just going to give myself that 1/2 inch in case I decide to go mortise and tenon, and we'll just keep it at that for now. So 1/2 inch in from the end. The next mark from this end is going to be placed at the 7 3/8 mark, and we'll just get our pencil in there at 7 3/8 and mark a square line. Oops, sorry about that. And we'll mark a square line right across our stock. Now this here, this section here, actually measures between this line and this line is 6 7/8, and this is actually the distance of our neck. From here up is the headstock of the instrument. So I'm not going to put any marks beyond here because the measurements for the headstock are actually on the angle of the taper of it. So until I get that taper cut, I really don't know how to measure. So I'm going to go ahead now and double check these measurements, and then we're going to mark on the side of this for the angle of the headstock. So I've transferred my marks over to the side of the blank, and I've rotated it 90 degrees. And what we've got here now is we have to mark the angle for the headstock, and I've measured that off and calculated that to be a 12-degree angle. So using my bevel here, I'm just going to mark a 12-degree angle just like that, and we're going to shoot over to the table saw, install a ripping blade, and I'm going to cut this here on the table saw. Well, I've cut the angle of the headstock and used a cabinet scraper just to take it down and clean it up a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a template for the headstock. Now, this is a template that I got out of a book. Of course, if you're following by a book or what have you, then you can use whatever template they provide, or you can make up your own design for a headstock. It doesn't have to be what a book claims it should be. So with that being said, now let's go ahead and make a template for the headstock. Well, we've got some 1/8 inch hardboard, and I've attached a half pattern of the headstock to this using this straight edge as my halfway mark. And I've also glued down a pattern of the neck profile, and I'll use that as a template as well to transfer those marks onto our neck blank. But at this point in time, I'm just going to run over to the scroll saw, and with the number 2 reverse tooth blade, I'm going to cut these out, and then we're going to come back and transfer our marks onto our headstock and our neck blank. Well, here we have our headstock template, and at this point in time, it's just a matter of lining it up with our center line, and we're just going to trace out our headstock profile. And as well, we've drilled some 1/16 inch holes here in the stock, and this will be for our tuning pegs. So at this point in time, we're just going to place our awl there, and I've forgotten my little mallet, but we'll get our little mallet, and once we get it lined up, we'll just give it a little wrap, and then we're just going to realign this template because I've accidentally knocked it out of whack, but that's okay. We'll line it up again, line up our awl, and give it another little crack, and there we have 1/2 of our headstock marked, as well as the holes for our tuning pegs. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the other side, and of course the way you do that is just flip your template over. Now, even though we've made a template and we've marked it according to our template, I'm just going to draw some square lines across our blank here, and I'm going to take some measurements from the print as well as measurements on the blank, and I just want to make sure that the spacing between all of these tuning peg marks is the way it should be. And once I'm satisfied with that, we're going to mount or mark the profile of our neck. Once again, we have rotated the neck blank, and I've lined up my neck template here, and I'm just using a clamp to help me because it is quite a thin template and I just don't want it to slip while I'm marking this out. So we're just going to trace this out, and what's going to happen here now is once we get our profile traced out of our neck, there it is, I'm just going to transfer some marks, make sure that everything lines up the way that it should line up, and once I'm happy with the way that this neck blank looks, we're going to be heading over to the bandsaw. I mentioned that we were going to head over to the bandsaw, but I got a little ahead of myself. Before we do this over at the bandsaw, I want to take this to the table saw and just cut this angle here. This will be a 12-degree angle, the same as what we cut the surface cut for the headstock. So we're just going to cut this piece off here at a 12-degree angle, and as well what we're going to have to do is I'm going to have to check the fretboard and transfer our marks for our fretboard onto the front of our neck stock so that we know exactly where to cut this for the width, as it is tapered from down at the bottom here near the body, and it tapers inward up towards the headstock. So let's go ahead and cut this 12-degree angle, and once we get that cut, then we'll make a template for our fretboard and lay that in place and mark out where it is we need to cut for this headstock. And there we have that 12-degree angle cut. I just want to point out the importance here of making sure that your table saw blade is completely square to your table. How can you expect to get a perfectly square cut if your blade is not square? So after I cut this, I kind of realized it was kind of pointless, because once I get this piece cut along this profile, I'm basically going to end up losing that 12-degree cut line because of the profile of my headstock. But that's okay. It was a good exercise in checking the blade. So if you want to eliminate that 12-degree cut, feel free. And there we have the template for our fingerboard or our fretboard. And you want to try to be as accurate as you possibly can with this. And further down the road, when we go to cut the kerfs for these frets, do not use the template. We're going to measure that out when that time comes. For now, we've only used this template just to shape our neck for the ukulele. And what we've done here, of course, is laid it down. We've put a center mark right down the middle, lined it up with the center mark of our headstock and of the bottom of our neck, and we've traced out the profile for the neck of the ukulele. And now, of course, that we have that, now it is time to head over to the bandsaw. I know, I've said that before, but this time I mean it. Well, we're over here at the bandsaw, and the first things first, you want to make sure that your blade is absolutely square to your table. If this blade isn't square, you're not going to get good results cutting your neck. So that's the first thing. Get that blade squared up. Once we get the blade squared up, we're going to start cutting this neck. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut the straight line here first at the back of the neck, and then we're going to cut along the headstock, and then we're going to try to come in around this kerf and straight up this line to meet up with the headstock, and let's just hope it all works out all right. When that's all said and done, we should at least have the side profile cut of our neck for our instrument. Well, the next step that we want to do is to cut out these lines here. But what we need to do is keep the headstock level with the blade. So we're going to have to keep that up on a block in order to cut that. And once we get those cuts done, we can just lay it down and cut along these kerf lines and get the rest of this neck cut. And here we have our neck rough cut. And what we're going to do at this point in time now is we're going to head over to the disc sander, and I'm just going to clean up all of the straight edges on this thing. So along the sides of the headstock, you can see there that I cut just outside the lines, and that's to give us the opportunity to final sand that over at the disc sander, as well as along the straight edges of the neck. We're going to take that to the disc sander and sand that off as well. Well, now if everything is going your way, you should have something that looks like this. And we're not done, not by a long shot here. We need to put a taper on this back corner. And what we're going to do is from this center line here at the back end of our neck, we need to measure 3/16 out on either end of this line here, and we're going to draw an angled line right down to the corner, and that will be our taper on the back end of our neck. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that, and I'll show you what I've got marked, then I'll cut it, and then from there we're going to carry on with the shaping of this neck. And there's the taper. From here, I'm going to cut this off with the bandsaw, I would imagine, and then over to the disc sander, I'm just going to straighten that out and make sure that it's a nice clean line, and then I'll come back and see you. Well, that taper is now cut and sanded, and from here now we're going to go over to the belt sander, and we're going to shape the back of this ukulele neck. Well, the neck is rough shaped, and I hate to break it to you, but now it's time to refine that shape, and there's really only one way to do it, and that's by hand sanding and scraping and all that fun stuff. So turn up some good music, crank it loud, and start refining the shape of the neck of your ukulele. Well, there's really no definitive way to tell you how to sand or shape this neck for the guitar. Or the ukulele. It's all a matter of comfort and what feels good in your hand. If the back of the neck is nicely sanded and it feels comfortable to you, then you're done. There's no need to carry on. So I've got a few imperfections here that need to be smoothed out and sanded. But I'm getting close. It's almost ready to be called a ukulele neck. But one thing I will caution you about is do not sand this flat face here. This is still the original one that we did at the jointer, and we need to keep that as flat as possible in order to mount the fretboard a little later. So just shape the back of the neck and get everything hunky-dory that way, and then you don't need to see 20 minutes of me sanding this, or a half an hour, or whatever it takes. So I'm gonna go ahead and do all this. I'll come back and see you and show you what the final neck and headstock look like. And with that, the neck is as shaped and as done as what it's going to be at this point in time. And of course, although it's not quite ready yet, adding it to our body, you can see that we're starting to get something that is very much resembling an instrument. And we still have a lot more to go, but unfortunately that's all the time we have for this week. and some great progress today. But next week we'll carry on and get even more done, hopefully, barring all problems and disasters. But guys, I want to thank you again for tuning in this week, and I'm going to see you again next week with yet another woodworking video.